We live in a miraculous time as far as Jewish history is concerned. The Jewish world today resembles no other time in its history, certainly for the last 2 millennia, and maybe even earlier. And when people live in a time that is so momentous and so miraculous, we would be unable to function if we really thought about it. So the rabbis therefore said the great rule, Ein balanes makir beniso. A person or a nation or a society to whom miracles occur do not recognize it as being miraculous. They recognize it as a series of events, coincidences, normalcy. That's the way the world works. And that enables us to get up in the morning and do what we have to do and not be awestruck by the time that we live in. The task of rabbis, however, is to realize how abnormal the society and the times are, and somehow to remind the people of it. And I want to point out to you the abnormality of our time so that we can appreciate what is happening and we can appreciate what we are supposed to do. The Jewish people have experienced nisim, miracles, throughout our ages. We have 2 holidays that are devoted to the memory of nisim, of miracles. One is Chanukah and one is Purim. And we make the bracha, she'oso nisim lavoseinu bayomim ha'im bazman hazeh. It was a miraculous time. But it was a miraculous time because we are looking in hindsight. At the moment that it occurred, people didn't realize it was a miraculous time. The Talmud teaches us that by Hanukkah, the rabbis could not establish the holiday of Hanukkah immediately. It says, Lishono Acheres. They had to wait for another year, another time, when they could look back and the people would accept it as being a miraculous holiday. So I want to ask you if the candles on the menorah had oil only for 1 day, and it burned for 8 days. So what do you have to wait for? You see the miracle in front of your eyes. So there were different groups of people, as there always are, especially within the Jewish people. So there were some that said, well, you know, it's a fake miracle. They somehow brought in other oil. Or no one was there really to see that it burned all the time. In the books regarding the Maccabees, they say that the Hellenist Jews, those who literally supported the Greeks against the Jews, and in the Jewish world there are such people, unfortunately, they all said that it's phony. It's not a miracle. So the rabbis had to wait. Only in the perspective of time did somehow the Jewish people come to believe that it was a miracle. And it's a miracle that has lasted until our day. A miracle that we celebrate yearly, that inspires us to the future. Purim is even a greater example of that. Purim, if you read the Megillah, is a description of Persian palace intrigues worthy of the current White House. Whole bunch of things happen here. The king kills his wife. His wife didn't show up at the party the way he wanted her to show up. He has a beauty contest, which is the proper way to choose a king and become president. And the most unlikely candidate in the world wins. The Gemara says, Esther, she was of poor complexion. She was not a beauty. Now, we all know that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I remember that when I headed my yeshiva in Monsey many years ago, so one of the young men in my smicha class, I had a good idea for him, that he should take out this certain girl. I felt that it was going to be a perfect shidduch. And so if the Rebbe tells him to take her out, so he took her out. A day or two later, I said to him, well, how did it go? Do you want to go again? He said, no. I said, no, why not? Let's try a second. And he hemmed and he hawed. And he finally said to me, I have to tell you the absolute truth. I have to marry a very beautiful woman. And she isn't. I have no words to say after that. 2 years later, I am performing the wedding of this young man with a very fine woman. Now, no woman in the world is ugly, but this one was close. And he has to marry a very beautiful woman, so he married a very beautiful woman. So Achashverosh chooses Esther. Strange. And what's a Beis Yaakov girl doing in a beauty contest? And she's got an uncle Mordechai who somehow becomes an informer to the king about people who are plotting against him. Disjointed events, nothing to do with anything. And then all of a sudden the king appoints Haman, and somehow, because of Mordechai's intransigence, Haman is unable to overcome his personal hatred, and he wants to destroy all the Jewish people, and he arranges that that should happen. And the king agrees, and he signs the decree. Now, the Jews in Persia were in good shape then. They were a minority, but they were not a persecuted or despised minority. We read in the Novi Yechezkel that the Jews came to the Novi some decades earlier, and they said to him, listen, we've been driven away from our land. We've lost our national independence. We're never going back again. Why should we make any fuss over observance of Jewish custom and tradition? K'chol hagoyim beis Yisrael. The Jewish people are like all the goyim. We're going to be good Persians. We're going to be Persians of the Mosaic persuasion, which is what Reform called themselves in Germany in the 19th century. They were Germans of the Mosaic persuasion. So we quit. The Novi is nonplussed. I don't know what to say. That night, he has a prophetic vision. In Kaviochel, the Lord appears to him, and God asks him, because the Lord is nothing if not courteous, like, what happened at the office today? You know, So the Navi says, Ziknei Yisrael, the elders of Israel, came to me. And what did they say to you? They said, we quit. They said, K'chol hagoyim beis Yisrael, we're quitting. Mo amarta aleim, what did you answer them? Aho Hashem Elokim ato yodeya. Lord, only you know. I have no answer for them. What are you supposed to tell them? What are you supposed to tell people that think that the future of the Jewish people is dependent upon our attitude toward transgender children? We're speechless. So God said, I'll tell you what to tell them. Kol amar Hashem tzvokos. Thus says the Lord of hosts. Tell them, hoya lo yiyeh hadovar hazeh. Tell them to forget it. It'll never be k'chol hagoyim beis Yisrael. I'm not going to let that happen. Im ki lo emloch aleim b'chema shfucha of Yisrael netuya. I will rule over them with an upright hand. I'll scare the life out of them. I'll show them that it can't be k'chol hagoyim. And within 2 decades, we have the story of Purim. Here comes Haman. Here comes Hitler. Here comes Stalin. Here comes Arafat. Here comes the whole gang. You know, what are you talking about? How dare you be a member of the United Nations? How dare you say you are also entitled to be on the Security Council? The only country in the world that does not belong to any regional group in the United Nations and therefore can never be on the Security Council. You want it to be like everybody else? Okay. It's not going to happen. I'm not going to let it happen. So now the Jews face destruction. And then all sorts of strange things happen. Haman is so infuriated by the fact that Mordecai doesn't bow down to him. So that's always the way people are in the world. People are what they don't have, not what they do have. It's not that the glass is half empty and half full. The glass can be 99.99% full. But it's not full. There's always more. In the Torah reading of yesterday, it's very hard to speak Tazria Mitzorah, right? It says, Vim dolhu, if he is poor, Vein yodo maseges, and his hand doesn't reach out for enough wealth, so then he doesn't have to bring an animal, he can bring a bird, he can bring flour, etc. So all the commentators say, you already said he was poor. What does it mean, ein yodo maseges? That his hand doesn't reach. And that's the lesson of human beings. If your hand doesn't reach to what it wants, then you're poor. Doesn't make any difference what your portfolio is. Doesn't make any difference what you have. It's what you don't have. And that's a lesson in life. That's why Chazal said, who is the truly wealthy person? Someone that somehow is satisfied. I remember that when 2 of my grandchildren were very young, and they were playing ball, 2 brothers, and one of the brothers, the older brother, was monopolizing the ball, and the younger one wanted to play. So he said to the other brother, he said, give me the ball, I'll give you a penny. And the other brother said, I already have a penny, what do I need one for? Well, thank God he's outgrown that, but that's something to think about. I already have one. I have enough. Yodo Masegas, does his hand reach out? Haman has the whole world bow down before him, and one Kratzy Jew in the corner doesn't bow down before him. He goes berserk, loses his mind because of it. He comes to the king with a crazy proposition. He's going to build a gallows 100 feet in the air. He's going to hang him. Wild, irrational. But the world is irrational and human beings are irrational. So he builds this tremendous gallows. Chazal say it tongue-in-cheek, that if he knew whom he was building it for, he would have built it 10 inches off the floor. But you're building for the other guy. For the other guy, you can't hang him high enough. And the whole plot unravels, and Haman gets killed, and the Jews are saved. The name of God does not appear in the Megillah. Anybody that lived through the time could say, what an interesting set of circumstances. Look at all of these incidents that happened. It has nothing to do with anything. And in fact, among the Jews, there were those who said it, and amongst Jews that were scholars, observant Jews, it says at the end of the Megillah about Mordechai, V'rotzui l'rov echov. Most of the brothers got it. They understood what happened. There were those that didn't. Those that said, what are you talking about? He didn't sit and learn all day, so how could it be any good? So let's transpose a little of this to our time, to how we see the world, and we see the events that have occurred. We're celebrating now 70 years since the creation and the founding of the State of Israel. In all of human history, there has been no comebacks. Rome is gone, Greece is gone, Britain is never going to have Hong Kong again. It's all gone. There are no comebacks. And all of a sudden, we came back against all odds. And we came back after the worst of times that the Jewish people had known for millennia, when everybody gave up on us. I cannot tell you the depression and feeling that existed in the Jewish world in 1948. And it was advertised widely that the Arabs are going to throw the Jews into the sea. It's going to be, God forbid, a second Holocaust, and then it's all over. In Chicago, there were then two frantic drives that went on. One was a frantic drive to raise funds in order to buy arms for the State of Israel, because they did not have any heavy weapons. And the only place that you could allow heavy weapons to be bought is, strangely enough, from Joseph Stalin in Czechoslovakia, which is a miracle in itself. The miracle that both the United States and Russia, for the first and only time in the history of the Cold War, voted the same on a major issue. And there was a second drive to try and bring as many refugees out of the Jewish state as possible, because they were going to be destroyed. And we were not going to sit idly by, as we did during the Holocaust. So there was a drive to bring 100,000, remember, 200,000 Jews from the land of Israel. And all of a sudden, something happened. Against all odds, against all wisdom, and the state arose. So when the state wrote, there were great people, I don't want to quote their names, but it's recorded in many, many books. There were great people who said that the state would not last 15 years. At the outside, 50 years. Because how could it last? Here it was run by atheistic, socialist, anti-traditional people. You have to realize the metamorphosis of the state of Israel over 70 years. That when you come to Eretz Yisrael today, it's a Jewish state. And I'm not saying it's an observant one, but it's a Jewish state. That was not so in 1948. Stalin supported, in his minutes, he recorded the reason he supported the creation of the State of Israel, because he was assured by the Israeli Communist Party that the Jewish state would be a Soviet satellite. So, how can we support a state made by atheists, by anti-traditionalists? So the Lord has a way of mocking us. You don't get it. You'll never get it. So don't try and get it. Don't speak. In essence, the Lord says, if I may paraphrase him, you know, the Lord has not spoken to me in the last 2 weeks, so I can't tell you much either. But the Lord says, you know, leave me out of this, right? Stop trying to figure me out. My ways are not your ways. My thoughts are not your thoughts. You just play the game. But we're always smarter than he. And therefore, how can it be? And then there were those that said, I remember all during my adolescence, I made a speech last week about being raised in a society that was not affluent. So all during my adolescence, I remember that my parents would not buy things for the house simply because of the fact that they had to send scrip to Israel. It was like care packages. You sent a certificate. There was a warehouse in Israel. They took the certificate. They went to the warehouse, and they got a box of food. The problem in Israel today is, what do we do with all the excess food? There's an organization called Leket Yisrael that does nothing but collect the excess food to try, and you can't get rid of it, all of it in Israel. So clandestinely they were sending to Syria. But in my lifetime there was no food there. With 2 eggs a week. My grandmother wrote my father that they hadn't had chicken in 3 months. And this is going to be a state? And then God is going to send them people. 600,000 Jews from the Muslim countries who had lived in the Muslim countries before they were Muslim countries. The Jews in Egypt were from Bayis Sheni. The Jews from Ethiopia were from Bayis Rishon. The Jews from Iraq, from Bovel, from the time of the Talmud and before. And they come at once. They don't come, one at a time. There's no housing. There's no food. There's no jobs. A different culture. That generation wasn't happy, but somehow their children and grandchildren are flying F-15s developing computers, becoming Rosh Yeshiva, owning cars, and taking Pesach trips. It's pretty miraculous. I mean, look at Africa. Africa is a blessed continent. It has tremendous raw materials. Has the ability to be really one of the wealthiest places on earth, and it's a complete basket case, from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean. Well, you also had 70 years to do something. And it's a homogeneous society, more or less. And look at the Muslim world. How destroyed it is. Even though it also has apparently everything it needs. And here you got this little country made by a bunch of shopkeepers and shoemakers and tailors, and who see themselves, and the world sees them as somehow a major player. America's best ally. How do you like that? Like America needs us. The United States sold its newest fighter plane, the F-135s, to Israel. So when the first two were delivered, the United States sent an Air Force general to inaugurate the program, and the Israeli Air Force chief was present, and they had a formal meeting in front of cameras and speeches about how wonderful it is, and they've got this fighter plane that does everything. The helmet itself costs, I think, well over $6 million. And you don't have to do anything, you just have to look, and it shoots wherever you look. So when it's all over, the Israeli Air Force general expresses his thanks to the United States government and to Lockheed Martin for producing this plane. And then he adds subtly, as only Israelis do, of course, we'll have to make a few improvements. And they did, and they sold the improvements back to America. So how did that happen? We have great problems, but we have had unbelievable success. In the Torah it says, "O aniso Elohim lavo lokachas lo goy mikerev goy." Has there ever been a case where God has extricated a people from within another people, as he did when he extricated us from Egypt? In our time, there are 1 million Russian Jews in Israel. And just think about it. After 75 years of communism, after having no contact with Judaism, after being only Russian, 1 million of them picked up and left. I mean, it beggars the imagination. And they are the most successful aliyah in Israel had been the Russian aliyah. And many of them have become Jews again in the fullest sense of the word. And the others are on the way. It's Jewish. Israel is Jewish. All of the dairy companies advertise to sell their products for Shavuos. There was an ad on the Israeli radio before Pesach. Don't clean your car, just rent the car from us for a week. Everybody understands that. Don't clean your car. You know, everything. Try that in America. What are you talking about? So we live in a time of great miracles. But we take all of the miracles for granted. We, as I mentioned earlier, because we have to, otherwise it would be too awesome for us. But at certain moments, we should stop and consider what has happened to us. And the understanding of the rebuilding of Torah in our time is also beyond imagination. I told this story earlier this week that when Rabbi Eli Meir Bloch Zatzal, the great Rosh Yeshiva of Telz in Cleveland, came to Cleveland in the 1940s, and he reestablished Telz Yeshiva. So he went to the local Jewish bookseller, and he asked to buy a Sefer Chazaq. Chazaq in Lithuanian yeshiva world was like a basic book of study. So he asked to buy the book. And the bookseller said, well, you wait a few minutes, Rabbi. And he climbed up to the attic, to the boidim, and he came down with a dust-covered, old, tattered book. And he gave it to him, and he said, Rabbi, be careful, this is the last Chazaq in Cleveland. But it wasn't. It just wasn't. Who would have imagined what we have? And that's not to say that our systems are perfect. There are no perfect systems. There are no perfect people. We have to make our way. We have many great problems to overcome. But nevertheless, it's a blessing that we have these problems to overcome. Because otherwise, if you're out of business, you have no problems. It's easy. When I was a lawyer many decades ago, before I repented, so I represented a certain client in a very large real estate transaction that he was going to do very well when the transaction was completed. He had bought very low, and he was selling very high, and it was substantial money. And I saw that he wasn't happy. That was before I gave him my bill. And I said, what's wrong? He said, you know, my accountant told me, you know how much income tax I'm going to have to pay. So I told him, I said, I would think that you would be happy to have to pay income tax. If you don't have to pay any income tax, you're broke, you're poor. But people don't think that way. So the problems that we have are problems of affluence, problems of too many children in the classroom, all sorts of problems, political problems. But those are the problems of success, not of failure. Those are the problems of the miracle that the Lord has performed for us in the time that we live in. Things that were unimaginable just a few short decades ago. I again remarked earlier this week that when I went to law school, no one wore a kippah in the school. And certainly not out on the street. You were a Jew, but you had to be careful to be a Jew. Every time I see on Shabbat people going to the synagogue wearing their talit outside, so without passing comment whether that's correct to do or not, but that is a measure of how far we have come. I can be a Jew. I can be elected vice president of the United States and be a Sabbath observer. You know, when Barry Goldwater ran for president, Goldwater's grandfather and grandmother were Jewish, but converted to Christianity in Arizona. And Goldwater ruefully said it would be ironic that the first Jew that's elected to high office in America is a Presbyterian. But that's not true anymore. That need not be true. So it's a ripple effect, miraculous times. And because of the fact that it becomes so regular to us, and so accepted, and we are so accustomed to it. So the idea that it is miraculous escapes us. But the 70th anniversary of the State of Israel is one time when we should at least have the flash that it's miraculous, that we live in extraordinary times, that we have opportunities that were not present for millennia for the Jewish people, and that each and every one of us has an obligation and an ability and an opportunity to help build the Jewish people, to help build Torah, to help build the State of Israel, and thereby to fulfill the dream, the promise that the Lord made to us that we see unfolding before our very eyes. I want to thank you all for coming tonight. It's been a pleasure to be here. Be well, and we'll hear good news from each other.